Alright, we're getting close to the end of all of our drawings here. I've said this in the last couple of videos, I'm going to try to make this quick. So we're trying something new today, where I actually have the teeth drawn out, because at this point, you guys should be able to find your way around the graph paper and plot everything out to where you're kind of just connecting the dots and trying to fill in some details. So what I wanted to do here is really just point out some details and some areas that can help you make this look more like a tooth, and some things that are really important about the first molars. In this case, we're drawing tooth number 3, so the first maxillary molar. So we'll talk first on the buccal aspect, and I'll just highlight some things in red. We'll see how this goes. I might shade some things in as well. So one thing is that when we're looking from the buccal aspect, we won't see all 4 cusps, but we will see 3. So this cusp here, that's our mesiolingual cusp. And then if we could see behind our distal buccal cusp, which is this one, then we might see kind of behind here, we would see another cusp kind of like that, if we could see it. In some pictures, you might actually see, let me just back up here. So you might actually see like a little bit of that cusp maybe poking out, like on this, like right here. Or this one might be shifted this way a little bit. It all depends on your perspective. But from a lot of the drawings that we look at, if you're kind of looking dead center on this axis here for this tooth, then this is about where you'll see that mesiolingual cusp. So just something to bear in mind when you're trying to place that cusp there. The other thing that's kind of a really important aspect of this view is that we have this groove right here. And this is our buccal groove. So that's, I believe, something that you guys will have to label. But that actually does kind of fall. Let me see if I can draw a straight line here. It actually does kind of fall right along that center axis of this tooth, kind of like that. Which, if we follow that axis, we also see that our palatal root apex falls in line with that axis. So that can kind of help us here. And I realize this might look a little bit weird right here, so let me add in a little bit of shading just to kind of give you guys an idea of where this is located. So this this area in here is the palatal root that we're seeing through the bifurcation of the mesial buccal root and the distal buccal root. So this is from the buccal aspect. We have that bifurcation right there, and then that leaves this area and this little bump back here. That's the apex of the palatal root. All right. So that should give you enough on that aspect. The other thing I will point out, and I'll probably point this out a couple times as I'm going through these drawings, is pay attention to the way that the CEJ looks on these molars. In the past, when we've had either single root teeth, or even on our premolar where we had that bifurcation in the apical 1/3 of the root, the CEJ was still very much just kind of like a round line, you know, and depending on the aspect, it was either kind of like this or it was like this, depending on which aspect we were looking at. That changes quite a bit in the molars because we have a lot more anatomy going on with the roots here. And so in between these roots, we have kind of a depression. Like think if you have, you know, if you were to hold like two pens or two pencils together and look down at them, like look down at the erasers. So if you were to put like two pencils together like this, and let's say that you're looking down at the top of the pink eraser like this. So from the side standpoint, you would have these two pencils. There's our erasers, and we're looking down like this to get this view right here. Look at what's happening with this rounded area where those are intersecting. You're getting a large depression. And so we can kind of think of it in that sense with these two roots here, is that these are kind of like those two rounded cylinders coming together to form this depressed area here. And so the CEJ is going to follow that anatomy a little bit. So we're going to see a little bit of a rounded area that comes up and over this round root structure here, and then it's going to depress down, and then it's going to come up and over, and that's super exaggerated, but I'm doing that on purpose. It's going to come up and over this rounded root structure here. So just bear that in mind. The CEJ is going to look really, really different. The measurements still are the same, so you're still going to use the measurements that are given to you in the instructions, but the way that it's drawn onto the tooth is just going to be a little bit different. And if we jump over to our lingual aspect here, we can see that again. Now, granted, from the lingual aspect, we're looking at the palatal root here, right? And this is one single root, but it's quite large. And in the development of it, we still see almost kind of, you know, two roots here with a kind of depression that runs between them. And you'll learn this in anatomy, yeah, I think it's in anatomy, but you'll learn that sometimes these first molars can have four root canals, and actually have you'll actually have two palatal canals along with the two buccal canals in the other roots, and that's because you get some separation through here, since in the development that root can kind of form two roots, kind of, even though they're joined together. So bear that in mind. You can then see how that CEJ is then kind of curving up and over, going down into this depression right here, and then up and over as it goes into that. So the other thing that we really need to pay attention to, sorry, let me get this out of the way, on the lingual aspect is the cusp of Carabelli, which is, I'm going to change the color here, which is about right here. It's on the lingual aspect of the mesiolingual cusp, and not all first molars have this, but it is the one molar that can have it. And it's also known as a talon cusp. But anyway, so that is where you're going to find the cusp of Carabelli. You can, when you draw it in, if you'd like to try to show a little bit of shading on the side, you can kind of shade that in to show that, you know, this is kind of coming out this way towards the viewer, if that makes sense. While the mesiolingual cusp is more kind of towards the back there. So that pretty much does it for our lingual and buccal aspects. So if we jump into me just switch over here. If we jump over into our other aspects here, we're looking at mesial, distal, and our occlusal aspects. And the biggest thing on these aspects, again, pay attention to the CEJ. You're going to have a lot of variation in terms of how that curvature plays, or how that curvature looks. And this, it's not just a matter of like drawing this right. You guys are going to, in clinic, knowing this kind of stuff will really help when you're trying to determine where the CEJ is when you're doing pocket depths and things like that, and measuring recession. It matters. And so knowing kind of how the curvature works and all that kind of stuff can really help you in determining certain things that you'll need to be able to identify in clinic. So bear that in mind. A lot of this drawing just kind of seems like busy work and you just got to get through it and it's just an assignment, but try to take some of this to heart because it can really help you out later on. So the main thing here is that we're seeing a little bit of, and we're looking from the mesial side here. So we're starting with the mesial. You can kind of see how that cusp of Carabelli is kind of hanging off on the side here. So that's the mesiolingual cusp, right? That makes this right here the cusp of Carabelli. And that's completely not legible, but it says Carabelli. We'll stick with it. So that kind of plays into effect. And then the other thing that I was just going to highlight here is that the buccal aspect of this tooth, I forgot to write in buccal here, so the buccal aspect of this tooth is significantly more rounded right here. And we can kind of see why that is, particularly if you have a cusp of Carabelli, because this lingual aspect doesn't really have a chance to kind of round back so much since it has this extra quote unquote cusp on the side there. Even without the cusp of Carabelli, most of the time you're still going to see more of kind of a flat side on the lingual aspect right there. That pretty much does it for the mesial view. There's not a whole lot going on there. One thing I will point out though is that you won't see all three roots on the mesial view. So we've got our, we've got our palatal root right here, and then this root is going to be our buccal, our mesial buccal. Sorry, that's really messy. Our mesial buccal root, and that's a little bit bigger, a little bit wider, a little bit taller than our distal buccal. And so if we jump over to our distal buccal view, we can see that this distal buccal root was kind of hanging out behind that mesial buccal root, and this is the mesial side. So when you're drawing this, something that looks kind of weird and you kind of have to wrap your head around it, at least in the drawings that you might see in the textbook and things like that, is that you actually have a pretty dramatic curve right here on this on this distal. Wow, that just messed me up. This is not mesial. This is buccal. That makes way more sense. That makes a lot more sense. Okay, so on this distal buccal cusp here, or not cusp, distal buccal root, I apologize, we have this kind of more drastic curvature as it comes in like this, which means that our mesial buccal root here is kind of behind this, like that. So you can kind of shade that in a little bit just to show that it's kind of behind and we have some distance there. Again, pay attention to the CEJ shape. And that's pretty much it for the distal view. So last thing is our occlusal view. And this one, it's kind of hard to figure out how to make this look like you're looking at the tooth. But the biggest things that I'll kind of point out that will help here is that um, we have our marginal ridges, so our mesial marginal ridge and our distal marginal ridge, and then our ridges that make up all of our cusps, and I'll kind of let you guys figure out what those are. But all of these things kind of link together to form our occlusal plane of our molar. And so our mesial and distal marginal ridges, we can kind of see form kind of the outermost edges of our occlusal plane that we have on our molar, and those end up getting kind of absorbed into our various triangular ridges, and kind of that start to make up our cusps. So let me back up just a little bit. I'm going to erase this. I'm going to keep the marginal ridges in blue, and then we'll try to make the cusps red. So we'll have these various. Let me back up a little bit more. So here's our marginal ridges, our cusps, and this is where it's going to be a little bit weird. Let me just draw. See if I can figure this out without making this too specific. So I'm just gonna, I'm just gonna outline. We'll just do this. So this is kind of how our cusps are setting up. This will make a little bit more sense in a second. So if I had any advice right here that would really help to kind of set this up is try to figure out where the outside of the occlusal table is that the cusps make up the occlusal table. So you're kind of going to get almost like this peanut shape here. Go ahead and draw in your central groove. That's going to help you identify where the cusps kind of start to play into this occlusal plane here. And we can add some little grooves and things in here. Anyway, so that kind of helps in terms of getting our cusps established a little better. And then we'll use, I'll just use like a little darker red. We'll do like a maroon. There we go. And then we're going to have our triangular ridges that make up our transverse ridge that kind of play into our cusp tips here. Like this. So I'm going to mark in purple that we have our cusp tips kind of like right here. So think about this like you're looking down on kind of a map of like a mountain range or something like that. And as we go towards the middle, we're going downhill. And as we go up towards the cusp hit, it's going uphill. So you can kind of play around with this a little bit, and try to get some shading if you'd like to. But that's the biggest thing, is once you kind of start setting in your central groove and you kind of figure out how the mesial and distal marginal ridges play into the shape of kind of coming up to these cusp tips here. And then we throw in our transverse ridges, then it starts to kind of take shape and starts to look a little bit more like a molar. So I think that's like 10 minutes shorter than normal. So maybe this helped. Hopefully it made sense. Let me know if you have any questions or if this was a terrible way of doing it. You just want me to do it the way I was doing it. You only have one more tooth, and it's a sorry, I just totally lost my train of thought here. It's tooth. I think it's tooth K, which is your. It's a child's molar. So our pediatric. The word that I want to use is escaping me right now, so I'm just gonna stop talking. But good luck, guys. I will have another video for you here tomorrow.